Hey guys, I have an obsession with all things history, mystery, conspiracy, and paranormal, and I love to tell tales. So, welcome to Sit and Spin. I'm going to spin while I tell you a strange tale. Today we're going to talk about Ziggy Adamski. If you want to know why he's important, hang out. We're going to be using this fleece. This is Shmee, who is a Gotland ewe, and I have just picked open some dyed locks, and I'm going to spin those. So, grab your coffee, your fiber, whatever you like to do while you listen as I tell a tale. I'll just adjust the camera and we'll get started. Zigmund Adamski, Polish by birth, in case you couldn't guess from the name, was forced to flee his country during World War II, and like many of his fellow countrymen, he settled in England. He became a coal miner in the West Yorkshire village of Tingley, which FYI is an awesome name, and in 1951 he married Locadia or Lottie. We're going to call her Lottie because I can't say the other name. Over the years, Lottie became so ill that she was confined to a wheelchair. Zigmund, whose own health was suffering, needed to spend more time with her. He had been off work for several months as a lung deformity often made breathing difficult as a result of exposure to coal dust, and he decided to apply for early retirement. And while initially his application was rejected, his company's decision was reviewed and they subsequently accepted. Unfortunately, this good news didn't arrive in the post until the day after he disappeared. And yes, Ziggy, as he was known, disappeared. You know I don't do normal disappearances, so let's look into why I find this one so interesting. So Ziggy had family visiting from Poland in June of 1980. His cousin and her son. He was excited to have them and was also excited to give away his goddaughter in marriage the next day. He even had a speech specially prepared for the occasion, and he wouldn't let that couple down for any reason. On June 6th, Ziggy took his cousin and her son into nearby Wakefield to sightsee, and they returned home for a lunch of fish and chips. At 3:30, Ziggy planned to run out and get some potatoes from the shop only a few hundred yards down the street. He threw on his jacket that held his wallet, driver's license, and some change, and he headed out, stopping to chat briefly with the neighbor who was washing a car. And that was it. He was gone. When Ziggy didn't come home, Lottie contacted the police to report his disappearance. They made extensive inquiries and appeals in the local newspapers, but drew a blank. Family and friends were sure he hadn't walked away despite the hardships of his current life. Ziggy was a loving family man with no known enemies, and he had a lot to live for after having been a prisoner of war and escaping the horror of the Nazis. They said he would never leave his wife. Lottie thought that maybe Ziggy had been kidnapped, although Ziggy's colleagues at the mine thought his disappearance was just a complete mystery. They had no idea what could have happened to him. Now, here's where things get strange. At 3:45 p.m. on Wednesday, June 11th, 5 days after Ziggy disappeared, Trevor Parker, the son of a Todmorden coal merchant, arrived at his father's coal yard to find a man's body on top of a 10-foot pile of coal. That body was, of course, Ziggy Adamski, although Trevor did not know that. Trevor had arrived that morning at 8:15 a.m., and he was sure the body wasn't there at that time. During the day, Trevor had gone out and left the gate unlocked in case there were any deliveries. There hadn't been any, though, during the day. Trevor was shocked to find the body, and it took him a few minutes to compose himself and call an ambulance. It would have been hard for a man to climb up the side of the coal pile, even more so because it had been raining for most of the day, making the treacherous footing even worse. If you've ever walked the shale of railroad tracks, you understand how coal shifts under your feet and makes it really hard to climb. Ziggy would have found the climb almost impossible because of his breathing problems. And even more, there were no marks indicating that someone had climbed to the top of the pile. When the ambulance attendants did reach the body, things got even more strange. Ziggy was wearing a three-piece suit that had no coal dust on it. Impossible to achieve in the climb up the coal pile. His shirt was missing, and his jacket wasn't buttoned correctly. His shoes were tied oddly, and his wallet and watch were never found. But the body itself was even stranger. Ziggy's hair had been cut short, but not like in a tidy manner, like someone had just hacked it off. And despite being gone for 5 days, he appeared to have shaved just the day before. And the only marks on the body were some strange burn marks on the back of his head, neck, and shoulder, almost like acid burns. And they had some kind of gel ointment on them that, FYI, could not be identified by forensic science. So police officers Mervyn Haig and Alan Godfrey arrived to inspect the body and to question Trevor about what was going on here, but Trevor really couldn't cast any light on the mystery. Godfrey said he would never forget the look on Ziggy's face. He said, quote, "Those eyes were staring up at me. I was looking down on him from a foot away. Those eyes sent a shudder down my spine. They were wide open. He had the look of someone who had seen something or someone that scared him to death." End quote. The body was transferred to the mortuary at nearby Hebden Bridge, and that night at 9:15 p.m., a post-mortem was conducted by pathologist Dr. Alan Edwards to determine the cause of death. Edwards estimated that the time of death was between 11:15 a.m. and 1:15 p.m., around 8 to 10 hours prior to the post-mortem. The body, therefore, had been in the yard for at least 2.5 hours before its discovery. There were no major physical injuries and no internal injuries, which showed he had probably not died from an assault. It didn't appear Ziggy had been sleeping rough, like hiding in a barn or garage or a shed or something. His body had only 1 day's growth of stubble, so he'd been staying somewhere. His stomach was empty, but that just indicated that he hadn't eaten on the day of his death. There was an abrasion on the man's thigh and superficial cuts on both of his hands and knees. But the most serious injuries were those curious oval-shaped burn marks on the left side of his neck and also below the ear. These had caused a slight loss of skin and a brown discoloration that Dr. Edwards thought indicated contact with a corrosive substance, though he couldn't determine what that substance might have been. The burns were not minor injuries, but they couldn't have been the cause of death. They could have contributed, though, by shocking Ziggy enough to bring on a heart attack. The final verdict was natural causes, as he had obviously died from heart and chest disease. Later on, James Turnbull, the coroner who ran the inquest into Ziggy's death, told the BBC in 2003 that the case was the biggest mystery of his career. He was baffled because although Ziggy had been missing for 5 days, he had only that 1 day's growth of beard. He said, quote, "The question of where he was before he died and what led to his death just could not be answered." End quote. Turnbull also said the strange ointment that appeared to have been used on Ziggy's burns could not be identified by any forensic scientists. Exhaustive checks failed to reveal any record of him having been treated at any hospital during his missing 5 days. So Turnbull recorded an open verdict, ruling that Ziggy had died of a heart attack, but with no indication of what caused it or if anyone was involved in the case. He said, quote, "The question of where he was before he died and what led to his death just could not be answered." End quote. And there it is. Everything we know about Ziggy's mysterious disappearance and death. In 2018, a spokesman for West Yorkshire Police said, quote, "The Adamski case is not part of any current investigation by the Protective Services Department." End quote. In Tingley, still a great name, people still talk about the Adamski case. And the case continues to fascinate investigators and those interested in unexplained deaths. But it may never be known what actually happened to poor Ziggy. Now, if you think this is the end of the tale, buckle up. There's so much more. We haven't even explored the theories yet. So, some people think Ziggy was kidnapped. At the time of his disappearance, Ziggy was in the midst of a family feud, and we know how nasty family feuds can get. He was sheltering a family member who was having marital problems. Now, I don't know for sure, but this sounds to me like a wife running from an abusive husband and that Ziggy was protecting her. It's theorized that the slighted family member or members abducted Ziggy and held him in a barn where he suffered a heart attack. Then they took him to the coal yard to dump his body. Okie dokie. That seems a little odd, but all right. Others put forward theories that he had been killed by the KGB forces. In those days, the KGB was the literal boogeyman. And since Ziggy was from Poland, a country under Soviet rule now, there must have been a connection. This seems, on the surface quite doubtful, but as one raised during the latter years of the Cold War, I can't dismiss it. The KGB did all sorts of crazy stuff. Maybe Ziggy did know something. Maybe they did abduct him. I don't know. But KGB, boogeyman. There was also a discussion that Ziggy had been left dazed and confused after being struck by ball lightning or some other unidentified phenomenon. But that doesn't explain how he got to the top of that coal pile to die. All right, here it is. You knew it was coming. Here's the big theory. Alien abduction, of course. There's several reasons Ziggy was connected to the UFO theory. He had obviously been somewhere during those 5 days, but no one had ever reported seeing him. And the body dump, broad daylight, on top of a coal pile, next to a busy railway line. Yet nobody saw anything odd. And dumping the body in that location would have been hard and should have left traces in the coal or the immediate vicinity. And it's really a pointless place to dispose of a body. Also, in the weeks leading up to the disappearance of Ziggy, there had been numerous reports to the newspapers and the police about orange fireballs and other unidentified flying objects, all across West Yorkshire, Halifax, and Todmorden. And while some of these sightings were explained as aircraft, atmospheric phenomenon, and flares used by the Moreland rescue teams, some of them still remained unexplained, including a substantial amount that happened after Ziggy had disappeared. Now, all of this leads to one of the officers who arrived at that coal yard on June 11th, Alan Godfrey. We heard from him earlier. Well, later that year, during the early morning of Friday, November 28th, Godfrey was on night patrol. He was driving along Burnley Road out of Todmorden, and he saw a huge object with spinning top section and a row of windows hovering on the road ahead of him. He stopped the car about 100 yards away, and tried to contact the police station with both his car radio and his walkie-talkie, but he couldn't get through with either. The next thing he knew, he was 100 yards further down the road, and there was a substantial period of missing time. Eventually, Godfrey agreed to be hypnotized to discover what had happened during that missing time. Under hypnosis, he told an astounding tale of being taken inside the UFO and examined by alien beings. He also made a sketch of the UFO, and his story made headlines around the world. This is a police officer saying he saw a UFO. People went nuts. Godfrey then went on to self-publish a book that included details of the Adamski case. And Godfrey said the case had similarities with the alleged alien abduction of American logger Travis Walton in Arizona in 1975. Godfrey said, quote, he, meaning Travis Walton, went missing for 5 days and he turned up alive. There are similarities, end quote. Have you ever seen the movie Fire in the Sky? That's the Travis Walton story. If you're interested, I can do a future sit and spin on him. But let's get back to Godfrey. Later in his life, when he was in his 70s, Godfrey told the Yorkshire Live that the story he told under hypnosis was probably a dream, adding, quote, I never said I was abducted by aliens, end quote. That's a big change of story, but he still believes it is possible that Ziggy was taken by aliens. He said, quote, I am open-minded. I can't rule it out, end quote. Godfrey doesn't believe Ziggy was murdered, despite the theories of more senior police colleagues. He also thinks that Ziggy didn't die where he was found. He said, quote, he was on top of a coal pile on his back with not a bit of coal on him. His eyes were wide open and he had burn marks. Why would he climb up a stack of coal? Something or someone put him on top of that pile of coal, and something scared him to death, end quote. So, what do you think? Was Ziggy abducted by aliens, the KGB, distraught family members? I don't know, guys. I think maybe it was aliens. And they just kicked him out of the craft over that coal pile and he actually fell on it. Wasn't carried up there. But I don't know. You look into it and see what you think. Thanks for joining me, guys. I hope you enjoyed a good yarn. And if you did, do the stuff down below, because I do stuff like this all the time. If you're looking for more good yarns, I'll link the playlist for you at the end. Have a great day and don't get abducted. Bye!